The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for kilometers in every direction. Its crystal walls reflecting the light of 1,000 holographic displays that showed the faces of delegates from across known space. For 12,000 years, this assembly had governed the galaxy. And in all that time, they had learned one simple truth above all others. The strong survived, and the weak became nothing more than a footnote in history. Director Yuki Tanaka stood at the central podium, her small human frame dwarfed by the towering representatives of species that had conquered stars. Before humanity had learned to make fire, she represented Earth, a world that had only discovered faster than light travel 43 years ago. And she had come here to request membership in the Concord. The laughter started before she finished speaking her first sentence. Grand Delegate Crix of the Crethful Dominion rose from his seat, his massive insectoid body casting shadows across the chamber as his mandibles clicked with barely contained amusement. He projected humanity's military statistics for every delegate to see, the numbers floating in the air like a joke waiting for its punchline. 12 ships, Crix announced, his translator turning his clicking speech into words that dripped with contempt. The mighty human fleet consists of 12 interstellar vessels, and they have come to sit among civilizations that command millions. The Volcorian delegate joined the mockery next, her serpentine form coiling with amusement as she added her own commentary. Their weapons are fascinating in their primitiveness, she hissed. Our children play with more dangerous toys than these so-called rifles and missiles that humans consider military technology. One by one, the great powers of the galaxy took their turns. The Synth Collective calculated that humanity would require approximately 17,000 years to reach technological parity with even the weakest Concord member. The Aurelian matriarchy suggested that humans might serve well as livestock, given their apparent fondness for being prey. The devouring swarm, a hive mind species that had consumed entire civilizations, simply broadcast an image of Earth being slowly digested over the course of centuries. Through it all, Director Tanaka remained silent, her expression never changing from the calm mask she had worn since entering the chamber. Some delegates found this silence amusing, interpreting it as the frozen terror of a primitive creature confronted by its betters. Others found it strange, perhaps even unsettling, though they quickly dismissed such feelings as ridiculous. Finally, the laughter died down enough for the Grand Arbiter to restore order, the ancient being's voice echoing through the hall with the weight of millennia behind it. The Galactic Concord has heard the petition of humanity, the Arbiter declared. Does the representative of Earth have any response before we render our judgment? Director Tanaka stepped forward, and something in her movement made several of the older delegates grow still. It was not the walk of a prey animal facing predators. It was the walk of something that had simply been waiting for its turn to speak. I have listened to your assessments of human military capability with great interest, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its soft tone. You have analyzed our fleet, our weapons, our population, and our single colonized world, and you have found us lacking. Obviously, Crix interrupted, his mandibles spreading in what passed for a smile among his species. A single Crethful battle group could reduce your precious Earth to ash in the time it takes to speak these words. Perhaps, Tanaka replied, and the lack of fear in her voice made several delegates exchange uncertain glances. But you have made a critical error in your analysis. And what error would that be? Little human, you studied our current capabilities, Tanaka said, her eyes sweeping across the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. But you never asked why we came here with so little, why we seemed so unprepared, why we showed you only 12 ships when we could have shown you so much more. The chamber grew quiet, the silence spreading like a chill through the assembled delegates. Humanity has a saying, Tanaka continued. Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. And we have never forgotten anything, not truly. She paused. And when she spoke again, there was something ancient in her voice. Something that made the oldest species in the room feel suddenly very young. There are things sleeping in our solar system that have not stirred in 50,000 years, she said. Weapons that were old when your civilizations were still learning to count. Ships that were built to fight wars that shattered galaxies. She turned to leave, but stopped at the edge of the podium to deliver one final message. We came here hoping for peace, hoping that perhaps this time things could be different. But I see now that the galaxy has not changed as much as we had hoped. Is that a threat? Crix demanded, rising to his full height. Do you dare to threaten the galactic concord? Little human. Tanaka looked at him for a long moment, and something in her gaze made the Grand Delegate take an involuntary step backward. It is not a threat, she said quietly. It is a warning, and I pray you are wise enough to heed it. She departed without waiting for a response, leaving behind a chamber full of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, all of whom were experiencing something they had not felt in a very long time. Uncertainty, the Concord debated for 3 days before reaching their decision. They rejected humanity's petition for membership by unanimous vote and declared Earth an unprotected world, fair game for any species that wished to claim it. Grand Delegate Crix immediately announced that the Crethphile Dominion would be launching a conquest fleet to subjugate Earth and teach these arrogant primitives their place in the natural order. The other delegates applauded his decision, seeing it as a fitting punishment for humanity's inexplicable defiance. None of them noticed the small smile that cross-directed Tanaka's face as she watched the announcement from her ship. None of them understood that everything had gone exactly as humanity had planned, and none of them had any idea what was about to wake up. The tunnels beneath the lunar surface had been hidden for 50,000 years, sealed behind rock and silence and the patient waiting of machines that had never stopped believing their masters would return. Admiral Chen Wei stood at the entrance to the great cavern, his flashlight beam lost in the darkness that stretched before him like the mouth of a sleeping giant. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment, as had his father before him and his grandmother before that, and countless generations stretching back to a time when humanity first discovered the truth about their origins. They were not native to Earth. They had never been native to Earth. The Crethphile fleet launched 6 hours ago. Commander Sarah Okonkwo reported from beside him, her voice echoing in the vast empty space. 4,000 warships. Enough firepower to crack our planet like an egg. And the Concord's response to our request for protection? Chan asked. Though he already knew the answer, they officially recognized the Crethphile claim to Earth, Sarah said bitterly. They called it natural selection in action. Chan nodded slowly, unsurprised by the cruelty of civilizations that had never known what it meant to be prey. Then it is time, he said, and he stepped forward into the darkness. The lights came on automatically, responding to genetic markers in his blood that had been passed down through 100,000 generations. Markers that identified him as a descendant of those who had built this place. What the lights revealed made Commander Okonkwo gasp, despite years of preparation. The cavern stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, carved from lunar rock by technologies that modern science could not explain, and filling every meter of that impossible space were ships. Row upon row of warships hung in perfect stasis, their hulls gleaming with metals that did not exist on any periodic table humanity had ever created. Some were the size of frigates, sleek and deadly, designed for speed and precision strikes. Others were carriers larger than cities, their bays holding millions of fighter craft that waited for pilots who had died before human Civilization began, and at the center of it all, so massive that they curved with the shape of the cavern itself, were the dreadnoughts. Ships so powerful that each one could have conquered the galaxy alone. This was the progenitor fleet, humanity's inheritance from ancestors who had ruled to the stars when the Krethful were still single-celled organisms floating in primordial soup. The archaeological teams found the first entrance 200 years ago, Chun explained as they walked toward the central command platform. It took us decades to understand what we had discovered, and decades more to accept what it meant. That we are not from Earth, Sarah said quietly. That we are refugees, Chun corrected. Survivors of a war so devastating that our ancestors chose to hide their children on a primitive world and erase their memories rather than risk them being found. He climbed the steps to the command throne, a seat that had waited empty for 50 millennia. Patient and eternal as only machines could be, they left everything behind. He continued. Their ships, their weapons, their technology, all of it hidden and waiting for the day when their descendants would need it again. And that day has come, yes, Chun said. And he sat down on the throne. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Biometric systems scanned his genetic code and found the markers of progenitor descent, accepting him as a rightful heir to the legacy of a dead civilization. Lights cascaded across the cavern in waves, each ship waking from its long slumber as power. Systems that drew energy from dimensions humanity did not yet understand roared back to life, engines ignited with the fire of collapsed stars, weapon systems charged with energies that could tear holes in the fabric of reality. And from every ship, every drone, every platform and station and weapon came a voice, a chorus of artificial intelligences speaking in perfect unison. Authorization confirmed, the voices said, speaking in a language that humanity had forgotten but somehow still understood in the depths of their souls. Welcome back, Admiral. The Armada awaits your command. Chun gripped the arms of the throne, feeling the weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders like a physical burden. How many ships are combat ready? He asked. 47 million primary combat vessels, the Armada responded. Additionally, 12 billion automated drones, 890 planetary siege platforms, and the 7 world breaker units are all operational and awaiting deployment. Commander Okontwo made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. 47 million, she whispered. The entire Galactic Concord only has 30 million ships combined. The progenitors did not build this fleet to match their enemies, Chun said quietly. They built it to end wars before they could begin. He rose from the throne, and around him the first ships began rising toward the lunar surface, their hulls phasing through solid rock as if it were nothing more than mist. The Krethful will arrive in 3 days, he announced. When they do, they will find something very different from the helpless prey they expected. And after the Krethful, Sarah asked. Chun looked up at the endless ranks of ships still waiting to launch, each one a reminder of what his ancestors had sacrificed to give humanity a second chance. After the Krethful, the galaxy will have to make a choice, he said. They can accept humanity as equals, or they can learn the same lesson the Krethful are about to receive. He walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in a cavern that had been silent for 50,000 years. Our ancestors hid us here to protect us, he said over his shoulder. They gave up everything so that we could live in peace. But they also left us the tools to defend ourselves if peace proved impossible. The last ships rose from their berths, filling the void above the moon with steel and fire and the promise of vengeance. The galaxy called us prey, Admiral Chun said, his voice cold with 50,000 years of suppressed fury. Let us show them what happens when prey remembers how to hunt. Above Earth, the stars themselves seemed to tremble at what was coming. Grand Admiral Krixthul had conquered. 18 species in his 300 years of service to the Krethval Dominion. He had burned worlds and shattered fleets and watched civilizations crumble before the might of his Armada. And through it all, he had never once known the taste of fear that changed. The moment his fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system, his 4,000 warships emerged from faster than light travel in perfect formation, their weapons already charging for what should have been a simple conquest of a primitive world. Instead, they found themselves staring at a wall of steel that stretched across the void, like the judgment of angry gods. "What is that?" Crixthal whispered, his mandibles frozen in shock as his sensors tried and failed to count the ships before him. His tactical officer did not respond. Immediately, the young warrior's claws trembling as data scrolled across her screen faster than she could process it. "Grand Admiral," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. "I am detecting approximately 47 million hostile vessels between our position and Earth." "That is impossible," Crixthal said automatically. "The humans only have 12 ships. I am also detecting 12 billion drone units, 890 orbital platforms of unknown design, and 7 vessels so large that our sensors cannot determine their full dimensions." The Grand Admiral stared at the display, watching as more and more ships emerged from behind the planet's moon, from folds in space that should not exist, from dimensions the Krethval physics said were purely theoretical. They just kept coming, wave after wave after wave of warships, each one more advanced than anything the Galactic Concorde had ever produced, each one radiating power signatures that made his sensor officers weep in confusion. And at the front of this impossible armada, a single dreadnought hung in the void, its hull marked with symbols that made something deep in Crixthal's genetic memory scream in primal terror. "Grand Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through," Crixthal ordered, his voice steadier than he felt. The face that appeared on his screen was human, old and weathered, but with eyes that held the weight of something far more ancient than any single lifetime. "I am Admiral Chun Wei of the Progenitor Fleet," the human said, his voice carrying clearly across the void. "You were given a chance to leave humanity in peace, and you chose otherwise. We do not negotiate with prey," Crixthal snarled, clinging to bravado even as his crew looked at him with growing terror. "Surrender now and your deaths will be quick." The human admiral smiled, and there was nothing warm in that expression. The Galactic Concorde called this invasion natural selection in action, Chum said. "They expected to watch you slaughter 11 billion innocent people for the crime of being weaker than you." He leaned forward, and somehow his presence seemed to fill the entire bridge of Crixthal's flagship. "Let me show you what natural selection actually looks like." The battle lasted exactly 9 minutes. Crixthal watched in frozen horror as the first wave of progenitor ships engaged his fleet, their weapons firing beams of energy that his sensors could not identify. His ships fired back with everything they had, weapons that could crack moons and shatter planets, weapons that had destroyed countless civilizations. The progenitor shields absorbed every shot without flickering. Then the counterattack came. Beam weapons sliced through Krethval armor like it was paper, cutting battleships in half with single shots, turning proud warships into expanding clouds of superheated debris. Gravity projectors seized cruisers and crushed them into spheres of compressed metal no larger than a ground vehicle. Swarms of drones overwhelmed point defense systems, infiltrating ships through the smallest openings and tearing them apart from the inside. And through it all, the progenitor fleet barely moved, barely seemed to notice the desperate resistance of what had once been the most feared military force in the galaxy. In 9 minutes, 3,989 Krethval warships were destroyed. 11 were deliberately spared. "Go home," Admiral Chun's voice echoed through the bridge of Krixthal's crippled flagship. "Tell your masters what you saw here today. Tell them that Earth is not prey. Tell them that the children of the progenitors have remembered who they are." Krixthal wanted to respond with defiance, wanted to threaten revenge and promise destruction, but his mandibles would not move, and his voice would not come. He had faced death 1,000 times without flinching, but he had never faced anything like this. "Tell them one more thing," Chun continued, and something in his tone made every surviving Krethfol go absolutely still. "Tell them that if anyone threatens humanity again, we will not stop at destroying their fleet." The human's eyes seemed to bore through the screen, seeing into the very soul of every being on every surviving ship. "We will come for their worlds," Chun said. "We will come for their colonies and their stations and their homelands, and when we are finished, there will be nothing left but dust and the memory of a species too arrogant to accept peace when it was offered." The transmission ended. Grand Admiral Krixthal, conqueror of 18 species, veteran of 1,000 campaigns, sat in his command chair and did nothing for a very long time when he finally gave the order to retreat. None of his crew questioned the decision. They had seen the face of something ancient and terrible, something that the galaxy had forgotten existed, and they wanted nothing more than to be as far from Earth as physically possible behind them. The progenitor fleet returned to their positions around Earth, silent and patient and utterly unharmed, and across the galaxy, every species that had been monitoring the engagement went completely quiet as they realized that everything they thought they knew about power was wrong. The humans had not been prey. They had never been prey. They had been sleeping giants, and the galaxy had just made the terrible mistake of waking them up. The emergency session of the Galactic Concord began in chaos and only grew worse from there. Footage of the Krethful massacre played on every screen in the Great Hall, showing in terrible detail how 4,000 warships had been reduced to scattered debris in less than 10 minutes. Delegates who had laughed at humanity just weeks ago now watched in silent horror as everything they understood about power was rewritten before their eyes. 47 million ships, the Velkarian delegate hissed, her serpentine body coiling with barely contained panic. "That is more than the entire Concord combined. Where did they come from? How did we not know?" No one had an answer. The synth collective ran calculation after calculation, trying to determine how a species they had dismissed as primitives could possibly possess technology so advanced it made their own look like children's toys. The Aurelian matriarchy demanded immediate military action, conveniently forgetting that they had suggested using humans as livestock just weeks before. The devouring swarm was ominously silent, their hive mind having calculated their odds of survival against the progenitor fleet and found the results deeply troubling. Through it all, Director Yuki Tanaka sat in her newly assigned seat at the edge of the chamber, watching the panic with an expression that revealed nothing. Then a voice rose above the chaos, ancient and trembling, but carrying the weight of ages. "We knew," said Archivist Kelmara of the Eternal Library. "Or rather, we chose to forget." The chamber fell silent as the ancient being moved to the central podium, its bioluminescent skin flickering with colors that indicated deep distress. Kelmara was old, impossibly old, one of the few individuals in the galaxy who remembered the time before the Concord existed when it spoke. Even the most powerful delegates listened. "What you saw in his recordings was not human technology," Kelmar began. "Those ships, those weapons, that power, all of it belongs to a civilization that ruled this galaxy 60,000 years before the Krethful learned to crawl." A holographic display activated behind the archivist, showing star maps that predated recorded history. "They were called the progenitors," Kelmara continued. "And they were nothing like us. The map showed an empire that spanned the entire galaxy and beyond. Hundreds of thousands of worlds united under a single symbol that made several older delegates physically recoil in recognition. The progenitors did not conquer, the archivist explained. They protected, they uplifted primitive species. They defended the weak, they maintained peace across more worlds than we can count. Then what happened to them? Director Tanaka asked. And there was something knowing in her voice that made Kalmara pause. The absence happened. The holographic display shifted to show something that defied description. A darkness between stars that was somehow deeper than mere emptiness. A hunger-given form that existed outside normal reality. We do not know what the absence truly is, Kalmara admitted. We only know that it came from somewhere beyond our dimension. Somewhere outside the laws of physics as we understand them. And it wanted only one thing. What? The Volcorian delegate demanded. Everything, the archivist replied simply. The absence consumes, that is all it does. It consumes matter and energy and life, and even the fabric of space itself, leaving nothing behind but void. The display showed battles that made the Krethval massacre look like a minor skirmish, showing progenitor fleets numbering in the billions fighting against enemies that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The war lasted 10,000 years. Kalmara said quietly, the progenitors sacrificed everything they have built, every ship, every world, every life, to drive the absence back into the void between dimensions. And the cost of victory? Director Tanaka prompted extinction, the archivist replied. Or so we believed. The progenitors vanished completely, and we assumed they had died with their enemy. Kalmara turned to face the human ambassador directly. We were wrong. They did not die. They hid. They took their descendants to a primitive world on the edge of the galaxy. They erased their memories and sealed away their technology. And they prayed that their children would never need to fight again. But they left behind a failsafe, Tanaka said, rising from her seat. Just in case. The fleet that destroyed the Krethval Armada, Kalmara confirmed. Weapons built to fight the absence. Hidden for 50,000 years and waiting for the day when they would be needed again. The chamber erupted in frightened whispers. Delegates finally understanding the true nature of what humanity represented. They were not primitives who had stumbled upon ancient technology. They were the descendants of gods. There is more, Director Tanaka said, her voice cutting through the noise. Something the archivist has not yet mentioned. She walked to the central podium, and something in her bearing made even the most powerful beings in the room shrink back. The progenitors did not defeat the absence, she said. They only drove it back, sealed it away in the void between dimensions. And they knew, they always knew, that one day it would return. Her eyes swept the assembly, seeing the fear that had replaced contempt, the terror that had replaced mockery. The energy signature of our fleet's awakening was not subtle, she continued. It was a beacon visible across dimensions. A signal that the progenitor's children had finally returned to power. She paused, letting the implications sink in. The absence felt that signal, she said quietly. And it is coming, before anyone could respond. The first reports began flooding into the chamber colony ships, vanishing without explanation in the outer territories, entire star systems going dark. Their populations disappearing without leaving a trace, void zones expanding at impossible speeds, swallowing everything they touched. You laughed at us, Tanaka said, her voice rising above the growing panic. You mocked us. You threatened us. You were prepared to watch billions of innocent people die for your entertainment. She spread her hands, taking in the entire assembly. Now you have a choice to make, she declared. You can continue to see us as prey, as enemies, as threats to be eliminated. Or you can stand beside us against the darkness that is coming for us all. Her next words carried the weight of 50,000 years. The progenitors fought alone, and it cost them everything. She said, "We do not intend to make the same mistake, but we will not beg for allies who see us as less than equal." She turned her back on the assembly and walked toward the exit. "Decide quickly," she called over her shoulder. "The absence does not care about politics or pride. It only hungers, and it is already here." The war against the absence lasted 3 years and cost more lives than any conflict in galactic history. Humanity led the charge. Their progenitor Armada forming the tip of a spear that united species who had been enemies for longer than human civilization had existed. The Krethval fought beside the Velcorians, their ancient hatred forgotten in the face of a threat that cared nothing for politics or pride. The Synth Collective merged its vast intelligence with organic command structures, calculating battle strategies that no single mind could have conceived. Even the devouring swarm joined the alliance, the hive mind recognizing that there would be nothing left to consume if the absence won. They fought across 1,000 battlefields, on worlds that burned and in the void between stars, where reality itself became a weapon. The absence came in forms that broke minds and shattered souls. Ships that existed in dimensions humanity could not perceive. Weapons that unraveled the fundamental forces that held matter together. Soldiers that were less creatures than wholes in existence itself. For every battle won, 3 were lost. For every system defended, 10 more fell into eternal darkness. Admiral Chen Wei commanded the progenitor fleet through it all, growing old and scarred as the years passed, watching friends die and worlds burn while the enemy seemed endless. But humanity did not break. They'd inherited more than ships and weapons from their progenitor ancestors. They had inherited a stubbornness that refused to accept defeat, a determination that burned brighter with every loss, a fury that grew hotter with every sacrifice, and slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn. Commander Sarah Okonkwo developed tactics that exploited weaknesses in the absence's dimensional phasing, allowing conventional weapons to harm creatures that should have been invulnerable. Krethval warriors learned to fight alongside human soldiers, their ancient martial traditions combining with progenitor technology to create hybrid units that terrified even the absence. The Synth Collective cracked the enemy's communication frequencies, allowing the Allied forces to predict attacks before they came. After 3 years of endless war, the combined fleet finally fought its way to the source of the invasion. The threshold hung in the void at the edge of the galaxy, a wound in reality through which the absence poured like blood from a severed artery around it. The largest battle in history raged without pause. Millions of ships from every species in the galaxy held the line against waves of absence horrors, dying by the thousands to buy time for what came next. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, the flagship of the progenitor fleet, watching the carnage with eyes that had seen too much death. "The world breakers are in position," Commander Okonkwo reported, a voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to do. The world breakers were humanity's final inheritance from their ancestors. 7 weapons so terrible that the progenitors had only used them twice in their original war against the absence. Each one was a singularity engine, capable of generating artificial black holes powerful enough to collapse entire star systems. Together they could seal the threshold permanently, collapsing the dimensional rift and trapping the absence in the void where it belonged. But the energy required would destroy everything within 3 light years, including the fleet that protected the weapons. "How many ships in the blast zone?" Chun asked quietly. 347,000, Okonkwo replied. "Including the Remembrance." Chun closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of every life that would be lost pressing down on his soul. Then he opened a communication channel to the entire Allied fleet. 60,000 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the void to every ship, every species. every warrior who had followed humanity into hell. Our ancestors gave everything to protect a galaxy that never knew their names on the Krethval battleship Vengeance. Grand Admiral Krixthul, the same warrior who had tried to conquer Earth 3 years before, listened to the humans' words with respect he had never expected to feel on the Vulcarian carrier Eternal. The matriarch who had once mocked humanity as livestock stood ready to die beside them on 10,000 other ships from 100 different species. Beings who had once laughed at humanity now prepared to follow a human admiral into certain death. They believed that one day their children would rise again. Chum continued. They believed that we would be strong enough to finish what they started. They believed that the galaxy could learn to stand together against the darkness. He looked at the threshold, at the endless horror pouring through the rift, at the enemy that had haunted his ancestors' memories for 50 millennia. Today, we proved them right. He turned to Okonkwo, his oldest friend, his most trusted advisor. The woman who had stood beside him since the very beginning fired the world breakers. 7 singularity engines activated simultaneously. Reality screamed. The threshold collapsed in on itself. The dimensional rift crushing closed under the impossible gravity of 7 artificial black holes detonating at once. The absence shrieked in fury and pain as it was dragged back into the void between dimensions. Its armies consumed by the same hunger they had inflicted on so many others, and the remembrance, along with 300,000 allied ships, vanished in the cascade. Their sacrifice burning itself into the fabric of space-time when the light faded. The threshold was gone. The absence was gone. The war was over 1 year later. Chancellor Yuki Tanaka stood before a memorial that covered an entire world. The planet had been renamed Sacrifice. Its surface transformed into an endless garden of monuments, honoring every being who had died in the war against the absence. Every species in the galaxy had contributed something. Their different artistic traditions blending into something beautiful and terrible, a testament to what the galaxy had lost and what it had gained. They laughed at us, she said, her voice carrying across the billions who watched from every corner of known space. They called us prey. They expected us to kneel or die. She touched the central monument, a sculpture depicting Admiral Chen Wei in his final moment, surrounded by ships from every species in the Concorde. They forgot that prey evolves, she continued. They forgot that the hunted can become hunters. They forgot that what appears to be weakness can hide strength beyond imagination. In the crowd before her, Krethval stood beside humans. Their ancient enmity transformed into something like brotherhood. Valkorians supported injured synth units, organic and mechanical, life working together as equals. Species that had been at each other's throats for millennia now shared grief and hope, and the beginnings of something the galaxy had never known before. Family, the progenitors, gave us a legacy of protection, Tanaka declared. We used it for war because we had no choice, but the war is over now, and the question we face is simple. She looked out at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization, at beings who had once mocked humanity and now treated them as saviors. What will our legacy be? She asked. Will we become the new predators, ruling through fear and force? Or will we honor those who died by building something better? She raised her hand toward the stars, toward the countless worlds that now looked to humanity for guidance. Our ancestors hid us on Earth because they hoped we would grow up differently, she said. They hoped we would become guardians instead of conquerors, protectors instead of predators, shepherds who lead rather than wolves who devour. Her voice strengthened, carrying the weight of 50,000 years of hope. We remember now, she declared. We remember who we were meant to be. We remember what our ancestors sacrificed for us, and we will never, ever forget again. The crowd erupted in cheers, humans and aliens alike celebrating not a victory but a promise. The galaxy had laughed at humanity once. It would never make that mistake again.